Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, Citi Field was rocking as the Mets took care of business during the week that was. We dive into the wins, Acuna Mania, and much more. We also go down on the farm to talk Drew Gilbert and Jett Williams, make our final scoreboard predictions, and of course, we answer your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcast, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today and subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. If you'd like to drop us a review, drop us a mailbag question with that review. Watch us on YouTube and also ask mailbag questions in the comments under the show there as well. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And Joe, the week that was, it was a special one for the Mets, taking care of business against the Nationals at home. And then, of course, taking 3 out of 4 against the Phillies in a wild, wild scene at Citi Field night after night. Brandon Nimmo challenged the Mets fans to come out and really, really light up the place. And boy, did they deliver. And in response, Joe, the Mets delivered as well.
It was an absolute electric weekend. I was at Saturday's game. That place was as close to sold out as I've ever seen it. Everyone was into the game, first pitch to last pitch. It was obviously the week couldn't have gone much better for the Mets, obviously losing just one of the games to Philly and finishing off the sweep of Washington. Just all around, this is what it is. I mean, if you build it, they will come. That is, obviously from Field of Dreams, but it applies to Mets fans as well. You've seen all the videos on Twitter. I shared one, earlier today of the fans. There's a guy drumming like underneath. It looks like the subway station, and it looks like a mob of people just celebrating. And that's what this is all about. So if you're the Mets, this is what you want to do every single year.
Yeah, I mean, you see what happens when this team is in it down to the wire, is that this fan base shows out, obviously, no matter what, and in a big way. I mean, it's been loud. The energy's been amazing. The fans have been holding on to different things throughout this season, obviously Grimace being one, the energy of this team. It's been really, really special. And for a long time, a lot of that was on the back of their MVP candidate in Francisco Lindor. And unfortunately, throughout this incredible run, the one dark cloud hanging over this team is after every game. And be fair to, obviously Carlos Mendoza, and to be fair to Lindor, they're out there answering the questions all the time. And I know some Mets fans are thinking, man, this is the team again, not being honest. The fans deserve to know. The reality is this is a back injury right now where there's no structural damage. That means Lindor can wake up one day and he could feel a lot better, go through baseball activities and not feel great or feel great. We don't know. He doesn't know. They are just taking this day by day. That's the one thing right now we're waiting on in this scenario, Joe. And let's be clear. All things considered, most scenarios, when a team loses not only their MVP, but a guy that legitimately had a case to take home the MVP this year. I know what Ohtani has done is special, but it was a conversation that you think in most playoff races could sink a team. And instead, the Mets have responded, which just says a lot about the heart and grit of this club. And we will talk Luisangel Acuna in just a bit. But Joe, it's just hard to not wonder, is Francisco Lindor going to be able to suit up for the Mets, not only during the end of this regular season, which is looking a little unlikely at the moment, but assuming this team can make the playoffs, in the playoffs as well. And to be honest with you, Joe, I don't think Lindor or the Mets even know the answer to that question right now.
I genuinely don't think they know, Connor. To your point, that I think there's a lot of people that do feel like the Mets are misleading the fans, because historically the Mets have not always been all that transparent when it comes to injuries and what things look like. But I genuinely believe Francisco Lindor is day to day. And when they say day to day, that means he could wake up tomorrow and feel pretty much ready to go, or he could wake up tomorrow and it doesn't feel quite right. But what it comes down to, in hearing from Lindor and hearing from Mendoza, Mendoza basically just saying, no real update, did some baseball activities, he hit in the cage, he ran, he fielded ground balls. So he's kind of saying the same kind of thing. And Lindor, just me reading between the lines, and obviously I don't know anything here, but reading between the lines, he sure doesn't sound like a guy that is, preparing to suit up Tuesday night against the Atlanta Braves. So I don't know when Francisco Lindor is going to be back. Hope he gets back during the regular season. But if he doesn't, the Mets have stepped up. And, we're going to get into Acuna in a big way, but not even just him. Over this last week with the Washington series and the Philly series, Francisco Alvarez, OPS of 1.214, 3 home runs. Tyrone Taylor hit 450 with a 1.14 OPS. Jose Iglesias, 467, 1.100 OPS. Look, this team has been resilient from day one of this season, where they started 0-5. We could just do it, right? They started 0-5. They got to 11 games under. And, from there, they have taken off. And a lot of that is on the back of Francisco Lindor. But this is a dang good baseball team. And they are showing that they can play with anybody, with or without Lindor. And that is not to, demean the value of an MVP caliber player. But the Mets are showing that they can play with anybody. And, when Lindor is back, Lindor is back.
That's right. I think what it comes down to is, you don't want to call them unsung heroes, but players that, let's be real, if you just read that list off for the most part to a Mets fan in March, they'd be like, I don't even know if some of those guys are going to be on the team when it comes down. And you're telling me they're in the thick of a playoff race and playing a meaningful role. Alvarez getting hot has been a multiplier effect, because not only are you getting power from the catching position, which we have said on this show, it's a variable for the Mets that holds such extreme value, because just simply when you go around the league, not a lot of teams possess that kind of power from the catcher position. It was zapped of that power for a long time. It has come back as lightning in a bottle in a big way. And the energy that Alvarez's home runs kind of sparked not only the team, himself, but the fan base as well. And it feels like they always kind of arrive in a really big moment, which is super. And he's said it, like, this is a guy that loves the moment. But you said it, Joe. Tyrone Taylor is somebody that you look at and go, is he going to be the fifth outfielder on the roster? And now you look at him, how do you take him out of the lineup? The guy just answers the bell every time you need him. And he also plays one of the most, and I say this with the most respect, casual center fields that you'll ever see. He makes the difficult plays look routine. It's not Carlos Beltran. I'm not going to say that, but Beltran had that kind of reputation where he would glide to a ball that would usually get through the gap, and you'd be like, he didn't even have to dive. He barely even had to go full stride. And then you look at Iglesias, which what more do you need to say? Jose Iglesias didn't even know if he'd ever be back in the big leagues after last year. And Jose Iglesias is the Mets leadoff man right now and the catalyst of everything they do. So, and I'll throw in one more name in there because, and I felt guilty of this. I didn't know when Senga was hurt, or I didn't think the Mets would have an ace this year. I said, without Senga, my concern with Sevy, as much as I was really high on Sevy having a bounce back year, was I didn't think Sevy would make this many starts. You and I were like, yeah, maybe 20 would be great, or 20 plus.
Yeah.
Sean Manaea has been an ace for this team right now. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's sustainable and Manaea is going to be, he's going to get a $100 million deal over 3 years and he's going to be an ace here or somewhere else for the next 3 years. And I hope he is, because I absolutely love the guy. But the reality is, since July 30th, Manaea has made, all of his starts, obviously. He made 5 starts in August. He made 5 starts in September. He obviously made the start on the 30th after the break. He's pitched 7 innings in 7 of those 11 starts, I believe. And it's been no runs, or at most 3 runs. Big strikeout numbers. Just a guy that has done so much more than his numbers indicate, because when you look at the month of September, where he's gone 7 innings, 6 and 2/3, 6 and 2/3, 7, 7. He has saved a bullpen for huge games to help out other starting pitchers. And I think there's a vibe element with Manaea. I think he's the perfect fit for this rotation. The way you see him, with guys in the clubhouse, how his teammates feel about him, how he carries himself, never too high, never too low, which is a really important aspect of playing in New York. And Manaea fits that bill as well, of somebody that was really signed when you look at the money and the role as, hey, can he be a good fourth starter for us? When somebody gets hurt, can he handle an elevated role as a number 3? Manaea is the Mets ace right now. And that to me has been a top 3 story for the Mets this year.
No question. And Sean Manaea is going to get some down ballot Cy Young votes. Like, he's not in consideration to win the actual Cy Young award, but he's going to get some down votes there. And, when you talk about bailing out the bullpen, this past weekend against Philly was as good of an example as possible. David Peterson, obviously, who has been, another starting pitcher, has been fantastic for his team, just didn't have it against Philly. So they pulled him early. And Manaea pitching the next night, pitches 7, starts the 8th, gives up the hit, and gets pulled out. And I think what Carlos Mendoza has done is he has shown a real good feel on how aggressive to be when it comes to taking starting pitchers out. Peterson, it didn't work out, obviously, his decision, but he pulled him early. He pulled Tyler McGill after 4. He lets guys like Sean Manaea and Luis Severino go into that next inning and kind of manage, like a lot of people probably say, give them that extra inning, but if someone gets on, you take them out. And Mendoza has done exactly that on numerous occasions. And yeah, like you said, Sean Manaea, potentially the top story of the whole season. And, whatever he becomes beyond this year, it is what it is. What he has shown as a guy that is now in his 30s, I think he'll be 33 sometime soon, for next season.
In the
I think
offseason, yep.
Yeah, in the offseason, he turns 33 years old. The ability to change at this age is something that is not very common. And he changed not only prior to signing with the Mets by going to Driveline and working on the sweeper and the things that we have talked about. He makes a mid-season change and goes, I'm just going to drop my arm angle down. And, a little more than that, but basically, I'm going to drop my arm angle down, and now I'm going to be an ace. So Sean Manaea has been an absolute godsend for this team.
Yeah, he really has. He's one of the heart and soul guys. And you brought up Mendoza, who I thought it was interesting this week, Joe. A lot was made of, of course, Pete's going to be asked about it, and Mendoza's going to be asked about it. This could be Pete Alonso's last home game at Citi Field, the final game against the Phillies. And I thought Mendoza kind of curveballing the response of, we plan on playing more home games here this year. Number one, it's obviously the perfect response, the confidence that you need. And Mendoza was with the Yankees organization for a long time. I've said this many times. It was never going to be perfect out of the gate because no rookie manager in the sport of baseball has a perfect season. But Mendoza had an advantage in his back pocket of understanding baseball in New York, which is a very, very unique element. And we've seen a lot of guys. And that was something that I think Buck was praised for when Buck had a really successful 2022. Say what you want about Buck's shortcomings last year, but Buck understood baseball in New York from both sides of it. I think, Joe, it was a microcosm moment, though, of the way Mendoza carries himself. And that answer had no fluff, or there was nothing phony about it. This team, it felt like the Mets at times over last year were not only struggling or injured or underperforming, the Mets weren't confident. Honestly, they were not a confident team. Their star players weren't confident. They didn't go out there thinking they're going to win every night. And I thought that answer from Mendoza kind of encapsulated the identity, the DNA of this team, where look at the confidence level of a Mark Vientos this year. Francisco Alvarez really couldn't do much right for it felt like a month of the season. And look at him in the biggest moment of the year. It's not just the star players. It's guys that the Tyrone Taylors, the Jose Iglesias of the world, guys stepping up, Luis Torrens being here and having a role, getting guys to step up out of the bullpen. That confidence, I think, starts at the top with Mendoza and has had a trickle effect on not the guys that make $20 to $30 million a year, but also them, but the bottom guys on the roster as well.
Buck Showalter was the right manager for the 2022 team. He was the right manager at that time. But when we were going through that hiring process and interview process and all the names that were being bandied about, and we talked about it on this show, I was saying consistently, I want the guy that's going to be here for a while. I want the long-term managerial option. I think the Mets have their long-term managerial option here in Carlos Mendoza. I'm not, going to declare he's got a decade of work here or whatever, but this feels for the first time in quite a while that the Mets have the guy that can be the manager for this team for an extended period of time. And you talk about, Connor, the quotes that he said over the last couple of days. I miss your old brick wall background because I need to run through that wall. I mean, what him just dropping that line of it's not going to be his last game. So when you drop the quote, you missed the better part for me, the first half, which was it's not going to be his last game. We intend to play more games here. And then answering about Edwin Diaz after Sunday Night Baseball, where obviously on Saturday, Diaz gets a 4-out save. Then he gets a 6-out save on Sunday. And he goes, we managed Diaz throughout the year. It's big boy time. It's big boy time. I mean, I couldn't love Carlos Mendoza as the Mets manager, I don't think, anymore. And you mentioned, the confidence that he has brought to the younger players that are getting opportunities on this team. And, guys like you mentioned, Luis Torrens and Jose Iglesias, and, we talked about Tyrone Taylor. He's giving everybody opportunity. It's not just trot out the same lineup every single day. These guys are going to get playing time, and, they've come through in seemingly, every chance along the way. But yeah, Carlos Mendoza, I can't say enough good things. And, between Rob Thompson with the Phillies and Mendoza with the Mets, the Yankees let, I think, two very good managers just get out from right under their grasps.
So you talked about, just guys getting opportunity. And I think the biggest story with this team right now in the short term that coincides with opportunity is Luisangel Acuna, who has come up here in 9 games. He's batting .379. He's got an OPS over 1,200. He's hit 3 home runs, which is the most startling number of all of this. We knew Acuna. We knew his glove would play. We know he can run. We know he can hit a little bit, singles here or there. This Joe has just been out of sight. Remarkable what he's doing. A kid, because Acuna is 22 years old, who has come up, and he won't turn 23 until next March, come up here and own the moment. He's been dropped into, you think about what he has been dropped into. He has been dropped into a team that is scratching and clawing to make the playoffs, that every game means so much. They're in playoff games right now. They're playing playoff games. The atmosphere, what it means. And I know they didn't put this on him, the weight on him, but he is replacing the MVP of the Mets and one of the best players in the National League. And to have those numbers, we're going to do a little bit of a Acuna mini mailbag here, and then I'll toss to you, Joe, because everybody wants to talk about Acuna. So this one from Michael Stawecki. Acuna is looking amazing. Do you believe he may have needed the challenge of the bigs to get him going? He seemed to be stagnant in AAA. Dan Punsky asked, with Acuna playing the way he is, do you think there is a place for him in the starting lineup when Lindor comes back? Chris1245TR, thank you for the 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Chris, said, if Lindor comes back and is ready to go at short, do you think Mendoza will have Acuna DH? I love JD and what he has done for us this year, but he just doesn't have it right now. And then CFGGFRT, thank you for the 5-star review on Apple, also said, hear me out. Once Lindor is back, Acuna at second, Iglesias at third, Pete at first, Vientos DH, Lindor back at short. What do you think? I know there's a lot to unpack there, Joe. I think we almost start with that last one because I saw you that kind of pique your interest, and as it did mine. That to me, and I want to be clear, I'm operating right now like that. I don't know if we see Francisco Lindor again this year. And if we do, he might only be able to DH. That's all I'm going to say. But let's live in a world where maybe Lindor can play some baseball this year again at shortstop. That last one is the most intriguing scenario, I think.
I didn't even think about that scenario for a second. I was thinking of different machinations. I'm like, does Acuna play center? Does Lindor DH? Like, how do they do it? That is just the easiest way to do it. Yeah, DH Vientos.
Right.
And look, this is what the Mets have done routinely throughout the second half of the season. You get late into a game, the Mets have a lead, or Vientos is not going to get up again. Iglesias slides to third. It's been a lot of Eddie Alvarez at second or whatever, but yeah, I think that honestly might be the best setup is Acuna at second, Lindor at short, Iglesias at third, and Vientos at DH. But we'll deal with the Lindor stuff as that kind of unfolds itself. Good for Luisangel Acuna to look. I obviously follow the prospects. We go down on the farm every single week on this show. I watch virtually every single game, and Luisangel Acuna in Syracuse. It's not Luisangel Acuna that I've seen on television over the last week. The stats weren't there. Anybody could go on Baseball Reference and see he hit 250 or whatever it was, 650 on OPS. Just didn't have a great statistical season, but even, looking into the data and talking to people, with the Mets, the batted ball data wasn't even all that good. So there was nothing watching Acuna play in AAA Syracuse that would have made me think that I was going to see this when he came up. And, he obviously gets the call, gets the opportunity. And, I think it might have been the first one that you brought up. Maybe he was bored. I think Keith Hernandez talked about that on the broadcast the other day. I think I was at the game when he brought that up. That is something I had heard with Ronnie Mauricio, that he was getting kind of bored of AAA and things kind of tailed off for him statistically. He gets called up, kind of brings the juices back, to the forefront. Acuna said, like, the bright lights make him see the baseball better.
That's really interesting.
I never even thought of that because, I mean, if you watch a AAA Syracuse game, it's not the brightest stadium in the world.
Looks like they're playing in the woods half the time.
A little bit, but look, it's tremendous, and it's a credit to him because he is such a mature baseball player. Like you mentioned, replacing an MVP, going in the middle of a pennant race or playoff push, whatever, in New York City, and he acts like he has been here for 5 years, easily fielding ground balls in the 9th inning of baseball games with the game on the line. We said it last week, right? Like, the defense isn't a surprise. And, sometimes these are basic plays, but I've seen basic plays get messed up a million times before. I couldn't be more impressed with Acuna. And I think at this point, regardless of when or if Francisco Lindor gets back in the lineup, Luisangel Acuna has to be a part of this offense through the rest of the season and whatever that playoff push is, because, man, it's too electric to take him out of the lineup and just have him hang out on the bench.
It really is crazy how fast we got here. That we went
last week, I said he's on the bench when Lindor gets back. This week, nope, he needs to play.
I think there's some situation aspects to it where, if we do go full, like, hey, Lindor's back, he's playing, sure, okay, great, I'll be as happy as anyone. I do wonder, they're not just going to completely write off JD from this team, especially against lefties where, JD can still hit lefties. But yeah, we have reached the crossroads that Luisangel Acuna needs to be in this lineup and have a significant role on this team if Lindor is back. And you know what? Thank God while Lindor is out that he's done this, because it has helped the Mets keep their foot on the gas. In some more of a downer news from a young piece of this organization, Christian Scott undergoing Tommy John surgery. Mendoza said it's safe to say he's going to miss 2025. Well, we'll see Christian Scott in 2026. Joe, we'll have a lot of conversations about the future of this rotation in the offseason, whenever that begins. But it's disappointing that Christian Scott will not be a part of it in 2025.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but, this felt like not, I wouldn't say a likelihood, but certainly a probability when
it's his first Tommy John, right?
It is. Yeah, he hasn't had Tommy John before, but he, the standard time of Tommy John recovery now is like 14 to 16 months. So it didn't matter, because I saw some people complaining on the internet, shockingly, that that he didn't get Tommy John right away, right? And they waited, but we've seen examples of Masahiro Tanaka, of Seth Lugo, of other pitchers that have that tear in their UCL that they're able to rest and rehab and pitch through, and they're okay. The reality here is you don't want to cut someone open and do surgery unless you have to. And it got to the point where they had to, and it's unfortunate for Christian and for the Mets for 2025, but I don't think this changes anything as far as being full bore, ready to go for 2026. And it just, it adds another wrinkle to the offseason that we will get to hopefully a long time from now, hopefully a little over a month from now, is when we're actually getting into the offseason. But yeah, got to feel for Christian Scott, and just, it changes the equation for the Mets as you go ahead.
It does. It's, it's a bummer. There's just no way around it. It's a bummer for him. We know he's going to be back. We know he's going to be a big part of this team's pitching going forward, but it's just the long road to Tommy John that unfortunately kind of become accustomed to as a baseball fan in this era. When a pitcher needs Tommy John, you go, okay, I'm disappointed, but nobody's ever surprised anymore by Tommy John surgery. It just feels like, and it feels like ACLs in football at this point, where you're like, oh man, I'm not going to see the guy for, a year or so. And that's what it is. Sticking with the pitching, we got to talk a little bit about the week ahead before we go down on the farm and get to our scoreboard. I mean, any Mets fan listening to this knows the deal by now. The Mets are in Atlanta for 3. They close out the season in Milwaukee against the Brewers. I think all that matters right now is, Joe, that the Mets try to find a way to win 2 out of 3 games against Atlanta. If they do that, they clinch a playoff spot. They will have a nice champagne and beer celebration at the Braves Park. I don't think anybody would love that more than the Mets and Mets fans, but you got to take care of your business. The way they're lined up, as it stands, and I know there's a big weather component in all of this. We'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the show. Luis Severino on Tuesday, David Peterson on Wednesday, Sean Manaea on Thursday, Joe. Do you like how the Mets have set this up in Atlanta?
I do. I think they're rewarding the 3 best pitchers that the Mets have had for a sustained period of time. Of course, Jose Quintana has had a crazy last 5 or 6 starts, but Peterson has been a consistent cog in this rotation. I think he earned the opportunity to pitch in this series, and it's all set up too with the idea of the playoffs in mind, or the end of the season. Luis Severino starting game 1 of this series means he could be the starter in game 162 if that's necessary. Sean Manaea can be set up for game 1 of a wild card series if they are to play in that series. So they're big picture thinking while also making sure their best pitchers are going out against, ultimately Atlanta's best pitchers as well. It's going to be Schwellenbach, Sale, and Fried for the 3 games. So the Mets, they're going to have their hands full, but hey, the Braves are going to have their hands full as well. And the Mets are certainly no pushover for any of these teams at this point. We talk about the hard schedule that the Mets have. These other teams have to see the Mets on their schedule and think to themselves, we have a hard schedule too.
Right. And the way they line it up, I know some people will be looking at it and, thinking, okay, you have Peterson and Manaea going lefties. And when you look at the Braves splits, they do have a 777 OPS against lefties this year compared to 708 against righties. But I think something to keep in mind is everything they've dealt with this year, and even recently, there's no Austin Riley in this lineup right now. So that lineup looks a little bit different with a guy like Riley, who, when you look at his splits, I mean, he's somebody that you would expect to do pretty big damage against those lefties. So,
and the Mets don't have another righty to send out if they wanted to anyway.
Right. And also, guess what? Their 2 best pitchers the second half of the season have been lefties, David Peterson and Sean Manaea. Yep. So I'm going to go throw David Peterson and Sean Manaea. And we can't reinforce this enough. The Mets, if they find a way to win 2 out of 3 games in Atlanta, they clinch a playoff spot. That's it. It's done. And this is a team that when you put such a simple goal in front of them this year, they often find a way to get it done. If they don't, it's not the end of the world. I can't emphasize that enough. If they win 1 game, they'd still be technically 1 game up but Atlanta would have the tiebreaker, which
Right.
makes the final series. The Braves have the Royals, the Mets have the Brewers. Nobody wants to go into the final series like walking on eggshells, like because then if obviously the Mets and Braves are tied at the end of the year and the Mets lose this tiebreaker, it's just I can't express enough how much simpler this is, Joe, if the Mets just win 2 out of 3, because if they don't, it opens just a wild amount of different scenarios that are all sweaty.
Very sweaty, but the Mets, what it comes down to at its core is they control their own fate.
Bingo.
Whether they win the series or they lose the series, getting swept would be not ideal because then you would kind of need a little bit of help. But as long as the Mets win at least one game, they control their fate to getting into the playoffs. And when we think about just this wild card race and what it's coming down to, and the Mets at 87 wins as we record today, which I got crushed preseason saying that I was a shill and I was, being overly optimistic that the Mets would win 86. I guess I was a hater. I was not high enough on this Mets team. But one thing that I want to bring up as we kind of go through this end of the season, last 6 games, the wild card race, a quote from Andy Bernard from The Office. As you see, I have Michael Scott over my shoulder here if you're watching on YouTube. I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you actually left them.
Right.
These are the good old days, people. Buy in. Connor, trivia for you. Since May 24th, what team has the best record in Major League Baseball?
Yeah, it's the New York Mets.
In the month of September, which team has the best record in Major League Baseball?
It's the New York Metropolitans.
2 for 2. That is elongated success. That is stepping up in the moments when you need to. The hottest team going into a playoff push. That's where you want to be. If you go
against
back
good teams.
Against good teams, they didn't face, I wouldn't even say Miami because they just take care of the Mets anyway, but they didn't just face, Washington, Chicago over and over in that stretch. What it comes down to, go back to 2022. September wasn't an awesome month for them. It felt like they were kind of just floating through, and then the Atlanta series that we don't need to talk about. But man, it's time to avenge that. And obviously, a lot of the players are not the same, so I don't think that the Mets will have that pressure on them that I think a lot of people are making it out to be. But just go take 2 out of 3. Take 2 out of 3. Celebrate on their field. Couldn't get much better than that.
Right, and some of the young players that were there at that spiral of 2022 are here now with a totally different mindset. And that level of confidence just changes everything. All right, let's go down on the farm real quick as the minor league season has come to a close here, Joe. We got to see Drew Gilbert and Jett Williams return from largely injury riddled seasons, and not like little things here or there. Jett Williams had a significant wrist injury. Obviously, Gilbert returned really, really late. He was dealing with a lot of lower body stuff. What did you see in their late returns where it felt like both guys found some success as they got some games in to close out the season, and how it affects them going into 2025?
Gilbert ended on a bit of a scorcher, especially in the power department. Ended up with 10 home runs for AAA Syracuse, and he hit 1 on opening day off of Robert Gazelman. I remember because I was at Citi Field for opening day, and Acuna and Gilbert went back-to-back off of Gazelman to kick off the season. Then Gilbert misses a whole mess of time before he finally gets back and hits 9 home runs the rest of the way for AAA Syracuse. And, he didn't hit for the average that probably he would like to. And, he didn't get on base quite as much as he wanted to. But, man, you watch that guy pimp a home run. He just feels like one of those guys that I can't wait to get him on a Mets team like this time next year and be in the lineup. And, I think he'll be someone that rises to the occasion for the big moment. And Jett Williams got the late promotion to AAA Syracuse. And, I wasn't sure how he's going to handle AAA pitching. It was just essentially a week of games. He was fantastic, hitting the ball hard, extra base hits, stole a base. So, the number one prospect in the Mets system for me showed that he belongs as that level of prospect. And We'll see if they send him to the Arizona Fall League. I believe that's still something that's under consideration. They haven't fully determined that yet, but I think it would make sense to get him some more at bats. But between Gilbert and Jett Williams, these are two great prospects that I think fans, when they follow this stuff, it's out of sight, out of mind, where it's just like, you don't see them. So Brand Sproat jumps them and Ryan Clifford jumps them. And, however you want to rank them, let's not forget how good these guys are. And not only are they good, they are not far away from the major leagues and making an impact on this team. So exciting days, not just now with the Mets in this playoff push, but exciting days ahead if you just, to just do one last down on the farm between AA and AAA, you have guys like Jonah Tong on the pitching side. You have Ryan Clifford offensively. You have Brandon Sproat, Blade Tidwell, Mike Vassell, Dom Hamill, Drew Gilbert, Jett Williams. These are guys, they're not all going to pan out, of course, but the Mets have depth coming in a meaningful way with legitimate prospects. And that is the whole object if you want to be a sustainable winner.
You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast. All right, let's jump into the scoreboard from last week, Joe. Yes or no, will Starling Marte hit at least one home run? You said no. I said yes because I say yes every week for about 4 weeks now. You get the point, Joe. Yes or no, will JD Martinez hit at least one home run? Joe, you said yes. I said no. I get a point. Over-under push at 1 for Pete Alonso home runs. We both pushed. Pete hit 2. No points awarded. Over-under push was at 4 for Jett Williams hits in his last 6 Syracuse games. Joe, you went under. I pushed Jett at 8 hits. Nice, strong finish for Jett, as you indicated on Down on the Farm. Over-under push was at 2 for Jett Williams stolen bases. Joe, you pushed. I went under. Jett had 1 point for me. Over-under push was at 3 for Edwin Diaz appearances. Joe, you pushed. I went under. He had 3, a point to Joe. Over-under push was at 4 for Mets wins. Joe, you went under. I pushed. The Mets won 5 games. 5. Nobody gets a point. We doubted the Mets. Yes or no, will the Mets be in or tied for a playoff spot entering the Atlanta series? We both said yes. We both get the point. We tied the week 3-3. Joe, you have the season lead 63-57. The final week is here. 6 games. 3 against the Braves, 3 against the Brewers. And since I'm not only playing some catch-up, but it's also the final week, producer Jeff got us some extra categories in this week, so buckle up. All right, yes or no, Joe, will Starling Marte hit at least one home run?
Nope. Just I'll keep riding it, and let's see what you're gonna go.
I'm gonna go yes. Starling Marte has never been more due in his life to hit a home run, and I have to get this point. If I said no and he hit a home run in the next 6 games, I would quit the podcast. So Starling Marte will hit a home run. Yes or no, will JD Martinez hit at least 1 home run? I'm going to go no again here, Joe. We're at the point now where playing time is going to be a little bit of a factor in this one. What do you think?
Playing time, and he's 0 for his last 32, I believe. So, this is
goodness. It's the worst stretch of his career since, obviously not counting his first or second year in the big leagues.
I believe this is his longest 0 for stretch in certainly a long time, if not ever. I'm going to do different picks than you throughout this, just for the sake of competition. But this one I can't.
But go what you believe in.
Yeah. This one I can't do it. So I'm going to say no. JD will not hit a home run. And great point by you. I think playing time will dictate that because Mendoza's not going to force him in the lineup.
No. Over under push at 1 for Pete Alonso home runs, Joe. It's at 1.
I'm going to go over. I don't know. If there's a week. Pete Alonso, we've said it for 3 months.
That would be something.
If there's a week to do it, this is the week to do it. And another thing to note, Pete Alonso historically has been fantastic in Atlanta. So I will go over on Pete's home runs.
I'm going to push for Pete home runs. Think he gets one in these 6 games, but this has been the story with Pete. Okay weeks, nothing marvelous, nothing carrying the Mets. I would love nothing more than for these last 6 games, or just in Atlanta, play a big part in 2 out of 3 wins for the Mets. But I'm going to say 1, which has been If you take this number all year, 1 home run a week for Pete Alonso, you'd be sitting okay. So I'll go 1. All right, over under pushes at 1 for Brandon Nimmo home runs. I'm going to go over, Joe. Nimmo is just he hits them in spurts. He's a guy that he'll hit 120 for 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden you can't get him out, and it's with power. Right? To be fair to Nimmo, though, he's always walked this year. It felt like he's been consistently getting on base this year again. But I'll go over. Big week for Nimmo, one of the leaders of the Mets.
He is a name we have not mentioned yet on this show, and that is bad on us that we have not mentioned Brandon Nimmo, because he was huge in that Philly series. So, but I will push. I will say he'll hit 1 home run, but Brandon Nimmo's bat appears to be coming alive in the biggest of moments, and he has found himself on microphone every single day after games, imploring the Met fans to come out, and I think he's just eating this up, but I will push on the home runs. But I do think a good week is ahead for Brandon Nimmo.
Here's maybe the toughest one, Joe. Over-under pushes at 1 for Francisco Alvarez home runs. You want to talk about a guy that hits them in bunches?
Yeah. I mean, 3 in the last week, over the series with Washington and Philly. I'll push again. I think he's certainly got another one in him, but man, honestly, under would shock me. Over would not. I think it's a push or an over. I don't know if I'm nudging you, but I'll push, and we'll see what you do.
I'm going to go under. He's hit 7 of his 11 home runs at home. I think he's a guy that really feeds off the crowd. I'm not doubting Francisco Alvarez, but it just feels like
sounds like you're doubting Francisco Alvarez.
For home runs this week, I'm doubting Francisco Alvarez. I'm going to go under for Alvarez. It's been amazing, the fire he's caught, but I think he's going to cool off in the power department. I don't think it'll cool off in the hitting department. All right, over-under pushes at 5 for Luisangel Acuna hits. That's a big number. If you said that number before Acuna debuted, the public would pour in all their money on the under, and they'd be dead wrong. I'm believing in the magic, Joe. Maybe this kid just has it. I mean, and you know what? It's going to be something a little different playing in front of his brother in Atlanta. And I know it's not the same because Ronald's out for the year, but we know how close they are. It just feels like being down in Atlanta will be a little different for Acuna. I'm going to take the under. You know what's fascinating with these lines, Joe? Fascinating. And I can't believe I even have to say this. I feel I don't even like uttering this on the pod. If the Mets win 2 out of 3 in Atlanta and clinch, guys are going to get a day off in Milwaukee here or there, which does affect the scoreboard in theory.
It does.
So, I'm not.
And looming Lindor too. Like there's
a lot of this number is very high for Acuna, but I don't know how I sit here and go under. And the push is the push, but it's landing on exactly 5 is bad odds. If I'm playing to win here, I'm gonna go over for Acuna. I think you can get to 6 or 7.
Okay, I will. I'm not gonna go over. I am going to push. I think even if the Mets do clinch in Atlanta, they're gonna want Luisangel Acuna to get at bats.
He has to play every day.
Yeah, so I think he would continue to play, but I think your overall point to just the offense in general makes a lot of sense. Nimmo. Luis Torrens plays 2 out of 3 in Milwaukee or whatever the case may be. But I think Acuna would have to play every single day. I'll push. I know it's tough to hit an exact number, but I will push for 5 hits, which is just about 1 a game, and hopefully he gets 10.
How about stolen bases for Acuna, Joe? It's set at 1.
It's interesting. He is not run obviously much, and he would have had a stolen base when he ran on Sunday night if Real Muto didn't throw the absolute most perfect throw.
Maybe the greatest throw I've ever seen.
Like exactly where it needed to be at the exact time. And, Acuna would have had that stolen. But, I mean, he keeps putting balls over the fence. You don't need to steal bases if you just take all 4 in one swing. But this guy has electric speed on the base paths. And, I feel like the home runs have to come down. So get on base. I will go over on stolen bases.
I'll push on this one. It's been funny. Like you said, Joe, He's hit home runs. He's had a triple. He's hit a double. Like,
Double. Yeah.
he's the thing with Acuna is that he kind of is this slappy hitter that get on first, find a way on first. We saw it. We did see the dribbler hit come into play, which is a big part of his game, and then steal second, which it almost kind of gives him this weird way to get doubles without hitting a double. But that has not been the case since he's been up with the Mets. I'll push for Acuna. I think he can get one. Over-under pushes at 3 for Edwin Diaz appearances, 6 games. We're going to talk about the weather situation here in a little bit to close out the show.
Yeah.
I'm going to push with Diaz. This is brutal because there's the clinching factor. There's the the weather factor. But there's also the factor that you pay Edwin Diaz $100 million as a reliever. If they need him to pitch every night in Atlanta, he's going to pitch every night in Atlanta, which sounds absolutely bonkers. But I'll push it 3.
I don't know if he'll pitch every night in Atlanta, but I think you should prepare to have him for 2 of the 3 nights in Atlanta. I think the clinching thing is a factor here. But I think in addition to that, let's say, just for argument's sake, the Mets win Tuesday and Wednesday, and they clinch a wild card. They're good. I don't think you want Edwin Diaz to just be off for the rest of the season and then waiting until the wild card. That's, essentially a week straight of time off for Diaz. So I will also push, thinking he'll pitch in a couple of the Braves games and they give him work in one of the Milwaukee games just to stay fresh.
All right, Joe. Over under push for Mets wins. The number is once again set at 4.
Oof. I'm gonna push. I think 4, and I think that gets the job done. I think if they win 4 games, I don't think there's any way they don't make the playoffs. And boy, if they push that 4 number, the Mets won 91 baseball games this season.
That's insane.
Who would have thought?
It's insane. So you do the math here, right? Say the not the worst case, but a bit really bad case scenario. Say the Mets win 1 out of 3 in Atlanta. But then you'd really feel like they got to sweep Milwaukee to just lock themselves into the playoffs, control their fate. I think 4 is the best number. And I know we're not going to, I'm chasing points here. So I'm probably going to have to go with a different number. But I agree with you that 4 is the best number when you're just playing the odds. Because then if they win 2 out of 3 against Atlanta and clinch, then it's kind of a coin toss because the Mets and Brewers are in this weird situation where they're playing against each other, but both teams are kind of settled into where they're going to be. So
keep an eye on what San Diego and Arizona do this week.
We keep forgetting Arizona is tied with the Mets as we record the show.
Which means they're behind the Mets because the Mets have the tiebreaker over both them and San Diego. And I believe San Diego's schedule the rest of the way, isn't it? Dodgers. I think they have Giants and then Diamondbacks, Giants, Diamondbacks, and
I know
Diamondbacks.
They close with the Diamondbacks, which is fascinating. Yeah. No, they play the Dodgers. The Diamondbacks play the Giants.
Okay.
So the Padres have 3 at the Dodgers and 3 at the Diamondbacks, which there's a lot happening there.
The first wild card ain't out of play. I mean, I'm not going to say
no.
Not going to say it's happening, but the first wild card is squarely in play for the Mets.
For sure. Okay, so you went with 4. I will take the over. I'll say the Mets win.
Let's go.
I'll take the over because that I would have been nice to take that last week and it cost me. All right, last one. If the Mets make the playoffs, which seed will they be? I will say the 5, Joe.
Oh, wow. I wasn't even thinking like that.
Let me say it the right way. Let me say it the right way. The second wild card.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think
they tie with Arizona and have the tiebreaker.
Yeah, I like them as the second wild card, and that means, look, you know what? Let's just do the story, right? Storylines isn't. People say sports are all scripted, right? Here's the script: the Mets avenge 2022 by taking 2 out of 3 in Atlanta, make the playoffs, and they avenge 2022 by going to San Diego in the wild card series and taking them down. So 2 seed or second wild card, not 2 seed, whatever seed that is. Yep.
You got it. You landed there eventually.
Yeah.
All right. Let's close out with one mailbag question here. And it's something I've been teasing all show. I can't believe this is the big tease of the show. We've gotten so many questions like this. I'll read this one from Kindness 903. Hurricane coming right through Atlanta Wednesday through Friday, no baseball. Another one from Delinquent Dog. Okay, what happens if it rains out on Thursday? If the game is necessary, they have to fly back to Atlanta on Monday, and if they win, travel back to Milwaukee for the wild card. Seems like a huge disadvantage. I know I sound crazy, but we need it to not rain this week for Atlanta. Let's just break it down. Number one, not a weatherman, not looking good to play baseball Thursday night. If you have any hopes, the scenario, Joe, has to be that they try to beat the weather and they play the game, I'd say at noon. I don't even think you mess around and go 1:15. I think you play as early as you can, which would probably be noon in this scenario. So that's number one. Number two, I know there's a lot of fear chatter on Twitter right now that the Braves this gets rained out and it's rescheduled for Monday and the Mets have to face Chris Sale somehow twice in a 3-game series. I'm never going to say no to some crazy scenario that the Braves try to pull off because nothing would shock me with that franchise. But that's also a lot happening. Let's be clear. There's a lot going. The Braves still have to play 3 games against the Royals, okay? So, Joe, I think the most likely scenario is as they track the weather, if it really is Thursday night, you have to move this game to noon on Thursday. And if you don't, that is incompetence at the highest level. And to the point where I would even question it and say that's not incompetence by Atlanta. That just feels like almost planned in a way. Like there's no reason this game should not be moved in some capacity. Up, not down.
Right.
Move the game up.
Right. And Major League Baseball I assume they're involved in some facet. I don't know if Atlanta.
Hope so.
I don't know if Atlanta has complete and full control where they tell the Mets, sorry, you're coming back on Monday if the game matters. But what it looks like, and like you said, not a meteorologist, not a weatherman, but my AccuWeather app I have here says Wednesday's going to be fine. So I think Tuesday and Wednesday they will get in. Thursday looks no bueno for a Thursday night baseball game. The day doesn't look all that awesome either, but it looks a little bit better. I think let's continue to, I guess, track the weather, and there's actual meteorologists out there that are going to track it. And, for as important as this is, we have to realize this is a hurricane that's going to impact people's lives.
Right.
So
right.
The Mets and Braves series, as important as it is for us as fans, it's not the most important thing on the planet. But in an ideal world, you're moving Thursday's game up to, like you said, 12 o'clock, 12:05, and you're getting it in. And the tough part, Connor, you mentioned this before we hit record. Let's not forget the Mets have to find their way to Milwaukee from Atlanta. So this all this timing has to work out. So I guess the answer is I don't know what they're going to do. But it's either move the game up Thursday or it's moved back to Monday. Honestly, those are just the only 2 options that exist. And, hopefully the Mets could just win on Tuesday, win on Wednesday. So that way game 162 probably doesn't mean quite nearly as much.
Yeah. I mean, listen, there's a simple way to solve all of this. Win the first 2 games of the series, and then who the hell cares, right? Like that's
exactly.
That's ultimately what it comes down to. So, and Jeff just made a great point to us that the ironic part of all of this, the Thursday game is a makeup from April.
That's right.
It's a makeup game from
that's right.
The baseball gods do not want this game being played. Just start it at 8 a.m. Just challenge them and be like, rain on this.
How weird is it that the original schedule had the Mets and Braves playing a 2-game series in the last week of the season?
That was the first thing that struck me.
It's a little weird.
Jeff told us that this was the makeup game. I'm like, wow, imagine how things would play out right now. Like, say, I don't know. Say some random won this game for either team, and now it's set up as a 2-game series where, let's say the Braves won it, right? And the Mets and Braves are playing a 2-game series, and the Mets have a 1-game lead. And you could flip a coin, anything could happen. After all the games you play in a baseball season, it's remarkable. But this has been, whatever happens this final week of the season, because you never know how things are going to go. This has been some of the most fun I've had podcasting in my entire life. Like this team, the energy of this team, watching this team every damn day, thinking back in April. And I always think to, the famous scene of nobody at the ballpark and Gary Cohen saying on the microphone, this feels like rock bottom.
Yeah.
And how this team found a way. We've talked about it's a credit to the manager. It's a credit to the guys in the clubhouse. And it's credit to some of the young players that have stepped up. No matter what happens, this has been a massive year for the Mets as a franchise, because it's not like 2022 or what was supposed to be last year, that old, mercenary style free agents are trying to lead the charge, which is fun. I have no problem with that. But you look at this team, and yes, they have some things to figure out with the rotation. Like, there are free agents. I'm never going to deny that. But the core of this team, David Stern's way of building a roster, and the core of this team, that a lot of the faces will be back next year. And yes, there's big decisions. I get that. Give you confidence for the future, and the fact that they're just a lot of fun to watch.
It's been an incredibly fun season. Like you said, obviously such a great time doing this podcast, but as just a Mets fan, it hasn't been this fun since 2015. And 2015 was such a fun season because at the end of the day, we get behind the underdogs, and the Mets were underdogs coming into the season. Nobody gave them a shot to forget be in a position to, maybe somehow squeak into the first wild card. Good luck finding anyone that gave them a realistic shot to make the playoffs at all. Heck, compete for the playoffs. I can't tell you how many people were in, my Twitter mentions throughout March. And then obviously when it struggled early on, that good luck winning 75 games. And the Mets are on the precipice of 90 wins. Of course, the job isn't done. And, if they don't come through this week, it's going to be incredibly disappointing. But nonetheless, this is the first step here of what the Mets organization is being built into going forward. The window, it may not even have opened yet for this team. That's kind of how I'm looking at it. So there are amazing days ahead. Obviously this week, these 6 games, and the opportunity to get into the playoffs in both David Stearns and Carlos Mendoza's first year here. But this is the first step in building the Mets into the organization that Steve Cohen has said he wanted since he purchased the team. And, like I said, a few minutes back, enjoy this week, Mets fans. This is what it's all about. And y'all came out to Citi Field, you showed out, and, saw all the post-game celebrations, and it was absolutely electric. And, hopefully, as Carlos Mendoza said, we got more games to play at Citi Field.
Well said, Joe. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. Remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question, and we'll look for it for a future mailbag. And, of course, you can watch the show on SNY's YouTube channel. Become a subscriber over there as well. We will talk to you in a week where we are hoping to preview Mets playoff baseball. Catch you guys next week.